All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials World podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? We have recorded 3 episodes now for this Valentine's month, Black History Month. And, my pick for a few weeks ago was Pinkerton by Weezer, also known as the blackest album ever made and also known as the most romantic album ever made. And this week, I think to end our Valentine's Day series, I want to choose a movie that is also extremely black and very romantic.
You can't see the face I'm making right now, but it'll be a good show.
Exactly. So for this week to end our Valentine series, I want to choose a black movie from a black director and also a very romantic movie. So for this week, we're going to be reviewing Before Sunrise by Richard Linklater. But before we get into our review this week, Brian, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Generational Cringe Week. All right. It is very cringe, yes. So, for this week, of course, I was joking earlier, this is not a very black American movie. This is maybe arguably one of the most European fucking American movies of all time. This is a very American...
It's pretty lily white, really.
Extremely so, abso-fucking-lutely. But I wanted to choose something that was kind of the exact opposite of this movie because, Brian, I believe you and I are both going to have very different opinions on this film. I think this is a very beautiful and romantic movie, and I loved it a lot. But I want to choose something...
That's very sweet. I'm very happy for you, genuinely.
But I was just browsing through things I could choose for a cringe generational segment this week, right? And I was just browsing YouTube videos, and I saw a music video. And when I pressed play on it, I said to myself, oh my God, I can't believe this. I cannot believe this. And to the people who have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about, this week we're going to be talking about the song from Master Artisan, which is called "Oh My God." Who and a lot of people may not know Master Artisan.
Master
was the original musical side project.
Are we allowed to say it like that?
I am. I say it with the soft A, Brian. Okay, I don't say it with the ER. I say it with the soft A. But that is the musical alter ego of the rap critic from Channel Awesome, which, of course, we haven't talked about Channel Awesome in a while.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly will come up again, but I mean, frankly, I needed a break after the Wall review.
No,
but yeah, I'd never heard of this guy before. This is a new discovery that you've introduced me to.
Yes, so, and to be very clear, the rap critic, I've always thought he was definitely one of the better Channel Awesome contributors, but I didn't know about his musical career until literally doing research for this episode for a cringe generational segment, because we need to talk about this song, Brian. It's incredible.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. I'd never heard of this guy. Was not familiar with his Channel Awesome critic review. Was super not familiar with his music until you sent this song to me. I assumed when I was listening to it that it was older than it was. Like, I thought maybe it was from the 2000s just because of some of the lyrics. Where do we start?
So here's where we start, I think. I think we first need to start off with the beat of the song.
Yes.
Which features several samples, but primarily the main sample is the dun, dun, dun.
Dun, 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 sting. It's that sting.
It's awesome. And there's I don't even know how to describe it. It sounds like a carnival music, accelerated.
Yeah. I don't know if it's carnival music exactly. It's kind of quasi-symphonic, but it's sped up to such a degree. And then the beat comes back around and it always goes back on that classic dun, 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 but sped up again. Beat itself is simple. It's fine, or would be fine, I think, but it sounds like dog shit. The sound on it sounds so bad.
Yes, and on top of it, too, the vocals are so loud over it. It's amazing. Somehow, the loudest beat of all time, the most, unsettlingly loud beat of all time is overpowered by the vocals. It's baffling. It seems impossible to do that.
When I was listening to this track, I was blown away by it because it's not, so I'm not going to say I think it's good. Between the two of us, I listen to more rap overall. I listen to a lot of older rap, a lot of stuff from the 80s and 90s. I'm not super well versed in contemporary hip hop, but I fuck with it as a genre. I'd say he's not a terrible rapper. His flow is very old school, and I think that's intentional, but it's very nerdy, and I don't think that's inherently bad, but it's so loud and it's over this crazy beat that's like a little too fast. It's like, how could you even expect to rap competently over this beat? Because it's so weird and it's at such a weird speed. One of the things that I learned about this was that apparently Master Artisan had a peer of his at Channel Awesome who has no experience in audio engineering but studied film do the sound engineering on this for him, which maybe explains why the mix is so fucked up.
Yeah, it is absolutely insane. And I'm thinking, Brian, right now, honestly, the beat on here sounds like Death Grips if it was made by the biggest nerd of all time.
So it doesn't really work to me. It's not catchy, but he's trying to do this kind of interesting thing because he doesn't intend for this, I think, to be like kind of an experimental rap song, right? He's not trying to write like a club banger. He's doing some lyrical backpack stuff. He's trying to be a little funny and a little quirky, and he's trying to go back to the oh my god and match it up with the dun 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 sting, which is kind of funny. Like it's a little clever, if he pulled it off a little better. Like it's not a terrible idea. But I mean, first of all, that beat just doesn't work. It's too repetitive and it's too minimal and it's kind of grating sounding. I don't know if it's the bad mix or it's just that it's a weird sound, but you listen to it for a long time and it's pretty much the only sound you hear other than his like super blown out flow.
Yeah, no, I couldn't fucking agree more. And also on top of it, and I want to be clear, I love this song. Like, to me, this is so bad it's good. I love it. It's like, I've listened to the song like 10 fucking times this week. I'm not joking.
Likewise, I actually only listened to it this morning, and I listened to it, probably 10 times today. I don't even think it's, like, that bad. I think it's not really good. Like, it doesn't really come together exactly. But I think it's, like, clearly he's, like, a guy with, like, a love of hip-hop and kind of a knowledge of it and some interesting ideas, even at this stage. Because this song is, 10 years old now? It's more like it's kind of a mess. And he's got a lot of ideas that, at least on this track, don't come together. And I'm willing to believe that maybe on some of his other tracks, maybe they come together a little bit better. But really, this is all sort of dressing. Because the really fucked up thing about this song is the lyrics. And this is he is like a lyrical miracle type flow rapper, for sure.
Honestly, I would not be surprised if Hopsin listened to this and he's like, oh my God, my protege.
Yeah, okay. So, no, listening to this, I was like, this is so much better than Hopsin. It's so much better than Hopsin or who's the Joker guy? You know what I'm talking about. But all of those awful kind of conservative lyrical miracle guys.
Are you talking about Tom McDonald?
No, he's a black guy. But, I mean, Tom McDonald also kind of could be part of that, but I wasn't thinking of him. I think he's worse even than those guys. But Hopsin and Drax, that's his fucking name. Yeah, I was listening to this and I was like, oh, this is like pre-Hopsin, pre-Drax. It's very like try-hard lyrical and it's like not very pretentious. This is not as bad as Hopsin or Drax. I want to be clear. I don't think that's fair to Master Artisan because it's not nearly as bad as those guys, but it is definitely like a precursor to them.
Yes, and the way I think it's a precursor to them is in the incredibly incel-y nice guy lyrics, because this is a nice guy incel song, to be clear. The lyrics are specifically.
That's part of the reason that I assumed it was older than 10 years ago, because it seems to me that by 2015, being this type of guy so openly would have been pretty unthinkable. And to Master Artisan, the rap critic's credit, he claims that this song he says it's not well done and he was trying to approach the subject with some nuance. According to him, this song is part of a song cycle about like alienation and mental illness, like basically a concept album, right? So he claims now that he was trying to be like a character of a nice guy and to sort of examine what it's like to be that guy in a way that's like sympathetic and kind of nuanced. And I have no idea if that's true, but that's his explanation today for it. But that does not come across. This does not sound like a character examination. It just sounds mewling and petulant, and it sounds just like those guys talk.
Well, maybe that like says about how good of an artist that he is, that he's able to immerse himself in it so much that he comes across that way. Maybe that's possible.
Maybe. And okay, I was thinking when I heard him say that, because interesting thing I learned, the rap critic, when this song went viral on TikTok, which I guess it did last year, he reviewed it. Like, he reviewed it from a critical lens, which I thought was pretty interesting. Pretty cool thing to do about your old work, So I guess it comes from, a concept album that's based off of a traditional tribal spoken word poetry cycle that he learned about. That, yeah, it's about like loneliness and failed relationships and mental illness, and it ends in like a suicide, right? So this is like smack dab in the middle of that album. And maybe it sounds different when you hear all those songs. Maybe it's more clearly about a character that's like in some sort of crisis, but it just sounds like some whiny backpack rap.
No, 100%. And I was gonna like just totally fucking rip this apart. I mean, we've already kind of ripped it apart, obviously. But I was like really, really gonna fucking rip this apart until you found that review, like literally just a few hours before we started recording here. And I watched it. And I'm like, oh, he's actually way more thoughtful and way more self-aware about this than I thought. So I really respect that about him. And then we also talked a little bit about, because the reason I chose this is because the movie that we chose this week is very romantic. And this song is objectively not very romantic. So I chose the exact opposite. But just watching that review, right? Just seeing the introspection and seeing the critical lens of it. And then on top of it as well, he had a bit about him talking to his old self about like romantic rejection and how to handle it better. And talked about how, a lot of like quote unquote incel nice guys or whatever, they don't fucking start off that way. They become that way through a myriad. Yeah, they want love. They see it through a myriad of or they get to that way through a myriad of reasons, whether it's, social isolation, whether it's toxic masculinity, whether it's just through a myriad of reasons, right? Like people aren't born like this. People are born like this, and I think a lot of the incel and nice guys sort of like hating on is this like weird, almost kind of like original sin that a lot of like I think maybe radical feminists or maybe like even liberal feminists attached to like kind of
liberal feminists is what I'd say.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. But like a lot of like loser guys, and they're just like, oh, they are always like that, and it's like that's not true at all.
Well, it's also a thing you'll hear say, and I think Amber Frost from Chapo Trappist has talked about this, is that there will always be people like, what's the big deal with not, like, going on dates? What's the big deal with not having sex? And it's like, well, that sucks. Like, it feels bad, obviously. One of the things that rap critic Master Artisan said in his review of the song, when he, like you said, he's giving advice to his old self that wrote the song, is like, that by having this kind of petulant, entitled, embittered attitude towards, like, women or whatever as a monolith who reject you, you are, like, making yourself a worse version of yourself. And instead of just being like, the best thing to do is to get rejected and just be yourself and like look for someone who just likes you. But instead you're making yourself a worse version of who you are and signaling to others that you're someone that they should not want to be around because you're this bitter, nasty guy.
No, 100%. And you know what, Brian? Speaking of basically the exact opposite, what I would argue is actually a positive portrayal of sensitive masculinity. I think that leads perfectly into our review here for the total opposite of this song. So, by the way, I can't wait till our final thoughts on this because I know we're going to completely disagree. I'm so excited. But anyways, so once again, this week I chose Before Sunrise. This movie came out in 1995. It was rated R. And it was directed by Richard Linklater, who I know, Brian, is an artist and director that you have very mixed feelings on.
I do. And this is really captured in some ways in this film. I think Linklater has a sort of, or had a skill for really embodying and capturing this duality of Generation X that I think we've talked about before. There's this really annoying, navel-gazy kind of like apolitical angst that you see in a lot of Gen X art that I really hate. But there's also like, I think we make fun of Gen X as millennials, and probably Zoomers do too, for like, oh, they have this obsession with authenticity and they're always cynical. And I always think like, well, maybe that's not always bad. Like maybe you can get back to that. And there's this weird balance of like loving and hating things about Generation X, and Linklater has all of that so wrapped up in him that I would say that every time I watch a movie by him, I'm like, there's shit here I really like, or there's shit he really does well, and then there's shit that just drives me fucking batty.
And this movie is written by, once again, Richard Linklater and Kim Krizan. And the next trivia factor, I should say the very first trivia factor I had here, is the screenplay was written in about 11 days. Although there is some controversy because both Julie Delpy and Ethan Hawke, who are the main actors in this movie, claimed that they improvised the vast majority of the dialogue here. But who really knows on that one? They weren't credited for it. But either way, that is the claim that both Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy have made.
If they're both saying that, that's interesting.
It is, and we will certainly get into that in the plot synopsis, which we're not going to go deep into it because there's really not that much to talk about in the plot synopsis. It's kind of
it's mostly a series of conversations, right?
Exactly, 100%. There's no, like, action scenes in here, really. Like, Optimus Prime doesn't come up and blow up Vienna. In this movie, This movie was produced by Anne Walker McBay, and Richard Linklater is a director, producer, and screenwriter. He's most well known for being involved with such films as Slacker, Dazed and Confused, this film and its sequels, School of Rock, A Scanner Darkly, Bernie, which Bernie's also a great movie, by the way, Boyhood, which is an incredible film, Everybody Wants Some, and he also did Suburbia. Suburbia. So he's been involved in a lot of movies, of course. A lot of very, I would say, pivotal 90s Gen X classics. And this is one of them, to be clear. This is very much one.
No, this movie absolutely is. This is, for me, this is the worst Linklater experience I've had, as someone with mixed feelings about Linklater.
Yes! I'm so excited.
But I understand how this speaks to like a wide swath of Gen Xers and Millennials. I understand why there are people that watch this and like have been waiting for like a romantic film like this. I'm not one of those people, but I want to make clear I understand that people feel that way. You are seen, absolutely. You are valid.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. But like I said, we will certainly get into that in a little bit, I promise you, because this movie did speak a lot to me. I'm going to be real here. This movie
That's so interesting to me.
And I'll tell you why. Once we get to that point, I will tell you why. So, and Kim Krizan is a writer and actress who's most famous for working with Richard Linklater and also Anne Walker McBay as well. They were both very frequent collaborators with Richard Linklater. This movie is 101 minutes long. It had a budget of about $2.5 million and it grossed $22.5 million. And for our Rotten Tomatoes critic score, Brian, we have a first for the show for our Rotten Tomatoes section here. On Rotten Tomatoes, Brian, this movie has a 100% critic score and a 93% audience score. It has a universal critical acclaim.
That's crazy.
Our very first 100% knocked it out of the fucking park, apparently, on Rotten Tomatoes. Out of 50 reviews, it has 100% approval.
Damn.
This is legitimately one of the most critically acclaimed movies of all time, just objectively speaking.
Yeah, I was kind of processing that as you were giving the tomato score. My God, man.
And by the way, this is part of a trilogy. It's called the Before Trilogy. And the lowest rated one in the trilogy has a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. So this is one of the most, this is like up there with like The Godfather with critical acclaim.
Yeah, this is like The Godfather.
Before we get to the trivia, because the trivia is actually fairly long here, but I want to get to the synopsis here, which once again, the synopsis is not very long because it's a series of conversations, but just real quick. So in 1994, Jesse, played by Ethan Hawke. And the next trivia fact I had here is when Richard Linklater first considered casting Ethan Hawke, he thought that the actor was too young for the part, which is very interesting to me because Ethan Hawke would have been roughly in his mid-20s at this point. And I'm sorry, this movie is a very mid to early 20s movie.
Absolutely. I can't imagine these characters, in this story being any older than like 27 or 28, really.
No, absolutely. And he meets Celine, played by Julie Delpy, on a train from Budapest, and they strike up a conversation. Jesse is going to Vienna to catch a flight back to the United States, whereas Celine is returning to university in Paris after visiting her grandmother. When they reach Vienna, Jesse asks Celine to disembark with him, saying that 10 or 20 years down the road, she might not be with her significant other and might not be happy with her significant other and might wonder how her life would have been different if she had picked someone else. Now, this is a very choice moment in the movie because according to Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy, but Ethan Hawke has told the story that I found anyways, that the original script was not nearly as verbose in Jesse's telling of why they should get off on the train together and spend the day in Vienna. It apparently was like, hey, you should come along with me and embark. And both Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy were like, why the fuck would she get off the train then? Like this random man that she's known for like a half an hour.
That's like women's nightmare.
Exactly. But Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy like kind of workshopped it, according to them, that it was like, well, let's think about it in like a philosophical way. Let's think about it in like a sort of an actual romantic way of like sort of like what could have been, right? And they both agreed on it, and they apparently won out in the end, obviously, for what's portrayed in the movie. But yeah, eventually they get off the train together, and the rest of the movie is them spending just a beautiful day in Vienna. Which, by the way, Brian, I'm going to have a very beautiful day in Vienna very soon. I promise you that. And it was not to be clear. I chose this movie not because I'm going to Vienna in a few months. I promise you that. But I wanted to pick a romantic movie, and I'm like, oh, it takes place in Vienna. Let's see what the fuck this movie has to offer. So...
Well, so I actually suspected the inverse, that you were choosing to go to Vienna because of this movie.
Nope. It was like, I was thinking about doing this like maybe 3 or 4 months ago. And once again, I wanted to choose a movie that was like a romantic movie that people like love. Because of course I chose Pinkerton, which is not a romantic thing. So I wanted to choose something
Yeah.
the inverse of that. And I was just sort of like, well, let me look. And I was like, Richard Linklater is a director that I watched Boyhood recently. So I'm like, what's another movie that people love from him? And I'm like, oh, this movie that literally has a universal critical acclaim.
And we've spoken about having to do Linklater on the show eventually because he's such a pivotal, like such a Gen X artist. Like we had to talk about him at some point.
Exactly. So there's a couple choice moments in the movie. So they first get off the train, they hang around the like bridges, they go on a bus and they talk about, various like pivotal early sexual experiences and romantic experiences. And they meet like two German guys who one of them looks strikingly like the Austrian version of Quentin Tarantino. He looks a lot like Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah. Yeah, actually I didn't think of that, but he does. Those are my favorite characters in the movie.
Yeah, because they're like both weird German guys who are like, yeah, let's go see a play. Well, he's the cow and I'm the this and that.
I was disappointed that we didn't see the play, to be honest.
Yeah, totally. And then eventually they make it to, and this is the scene that is by far, in my opinion, the most famous in the movie. They go to the record store and they go to the listening booth. And honestly, Brian, this is honestly where the movie really fucking it warmed my heart in a way because they're just sitting in the listening booth. They both share glances at each other. They try looking away every time and you could tell they have feelings. I love it. It's beautiful.
The song that they are listening to together in the listening booth, the first several seconds of it sound just like Wherever You Go by The Calling.
Okay, so I believe that because I think
it's a beautiful
lot of
song. It's a beautiful song in the actual film. It truly is. It's some old kind of folk, love song. It's very pretty. But the first several seconds, I was expecting it to be like, so lately, been wondering. And I was like, no fucking way.
But by the way, though, bands like that, they think they're making songs like this. And they're like, oh yeah, my fucking girl's gonna fall in love when I sing this fucking song.
Yeah, my fucking butt rock band. And we're writing the most emotional, resonant love song of our generation.
Yeah, no, totally. That's fucking hilarious. And then eventually they make it to a carnival where they go up on this like Ferris wheel, which is apparently a very famous like site in Vienna. And they finally make out. They confess more of their feelings to each other. And that's also a scene that really like fucking just warmed my heart. I love it. Like, I want to be clear. I think this movie is incredibly emotionally resonant to me because traveling throughout the world, I've had experiences that could have turned into this. And I've never actually been able to like jump on that opportunity. There was always either I was too busy or I was too nervous or there was something that could have been on the horizon.
You missed the moment.
And I missed the moment, which is why this movie is incredibly emotionally resonant to me. Because I think like, what if I actually did something like this? What if I took a chance and jumped at this opportunity, which is why it really struck with me.
Here's where I can see why people like it. This premise, the premise of meeting someone like this randomly in another country, spending the day with them, that could be very romantic. That is a romantic, sweet premise. I hate these people.
Yes! Yes!
I hate the way they talk.
Really?
I hate awesome. Ethan Hawke's character so much. I think that, oh my God, he never shuts up. I hate how wishy-washy the woman is, but I just hate Ethan Hawke. I think he says the most boring, unfunny shit, and he never stops talking.
So here's the thing, Brian. I love both these characters.
I know.
I think they're like incredibly realistic young people who are disillusioned with the world around them. And they're trying to find a connection where they didn't believe a connection could be. I think these people are like, I would be friends with these people. I legitimately would, both of them.
I think they're so annoying. There's a scene where they're in like a cafe and they're pretending, she's pretending that he is her friend, and he's like pretend that I'm your friend, that you're calling, that she's gonna see her friend tomorrow, or she plans to, and she's like pretending to talk to her friend and tell her what she thinks of this guy she met. It's supposed to be this very cute scene. And all I could think of is like, it's this quirked up thing where they're like, everyone in the restaurant is looking at us like we're crazy right now. We're being so crazy. This is so crazy of us. Ethan Hawke.
Well, that's the thing you talk about quirked up, right? That's the thing is that all those like mumblecore and like 2000, like Zach Braff, they were heavily influenced by movies.
Of course.
But I think the difference, though, at least in my opinion, right, is that, like, there's, like, a romance and there's a love here that it's romantic, but it's not sappy. Yeah. Whereas those movies are sappy, like, just twee bullshit, where I don't really see that here. I see, like, a naive, burgeoning romance that I think is fairly realistic. Like I said, I've had experiences like this
So
before.
those aspects of it that you've described, I can agree with. I just think the way they are acting and the way they talk and the things that we're supposed to read as being really romantic and really interesting are just annoying to me. The way Ethan Hawke talks in this movie is okay. So I watched this with a female friend of mine, and she said something that I thought was really interesting. She said, "Oh, this is, you know what it's like. You've known guys that say like weird kind of, they tell you these kind of whimsical stories, like when Ethan Hawke is talking about seeing his grandmother's ghost and, you know, the rainbow spring through the water." She's like, "You know how guys always tell you stories like that?" And I told her, guys don't say stories like that to me. Guys don't say stories like that to each other. If I knew a guy like that, I didn't know it because he wasn't telling me that story. That's a story that guy saved to tell you, because that's a story they tell women.
Yes, that is very true. And, you know, I will say at first, watching this movie, I would say for like the first 15, 20 minutes, he did give me the ick. I'm going to be honest here. He did. It seemed to me like he was, I would say at first, almost being like very emotionally manipulative to Celine. But I think as the movie goes on, I think it's very clear that he is actually like an incredibly emotionally sensitive person who is just not emotionally mature enough yet to just be able to just brazenly say how he really feels. And he's working through that.
I agree. I don't think he's being predatory or he's being bad or anything. I just think he sounds so dumb.
I think we can say this now, of course, because we're much older than the people portrayed in this movie, because they were like in their early to mid-20s at the latest.
At the very latest.
I think if we were to go back, Brian, I think you and I's conversations on trying to pick up women and trying to be like philosophical or whatever would probably be just as cringy as this.
They absolutely would be, but they wouldn't be like this. I'm not coming at this from a moral perspective. Except there is actually one thing I don't like. I think there's a weird gender dynamic in the way that the two characters talk about sex that does not jive with my. I'm not saying it never happens. It makes me think a lot like, oh, women don't like sex the way men do, or they have some hang-ups about it, which like they can, but it gets into, to me, like this, like men are like this, women are like this thing, and it doesn't go really hard on it. I think that's almost like the default position of media at the time, but it is a thing where I'm like, all right, whatever.
Yeah.
But that's not.
I agree. I think that it was very much of a 90s, men are from Mars, women are from Venus type bullshit.
And this movie does not go, it's like just of its time in that. It doesn't, I don't like think it's, I think it's probably less bad than a lot of romance films in that regard. My thing is just that I hate them. I hate the conversations they have. I hate the things that they say that they think are interesting. I hate the way that whenever she replies to something that he says, she goes, "That's sad. That's funny." She's always saying that's something. And I'm sure there are women that talk that way who feel very seen by that. But to me, it makes her sound like a baby. That's so funny. That's so sad. That's so beautiful.
But that's the thing, though, Brian. I think so. I have a theory for that as well, and I do agree with that to a certain extent. But like, once again, she's also young. She's traveling throughout areas she's not super familiar with. She's meeting some random guy. These are basically
with a guy she doesn't know.
Exactly. These are conversations of somebody who's trying to build a relationship. Like when you're trying to build a relationship with somebody, these are all like warm-up conversations essentially, because they've only known each other for a couple hours. You know what I mean?
This is
like,
true.
If they had known each other for like 6 months and they're still doing this, I'd be like, okay, grow up a little bit. But it's only been a couple hours.
Okay, fair.
Now, to be clear, once again, the fact that this movie didn't resonate with you as much as it did with me, that's totally fine. Like, I'm not trying to be like super defensive and be like, oh, you didn't love this like I did or whatever. But like,
you're not at all. You're not at all. This works out perfectly because, and not to give up the ghost here, there is a Linklater movie that resonates very strongly with me, that has all of the same annoying men-women issues, and it has all the same annoying end-of-history Gen X, like, anti-politics that this does. But I relate to things in it, so I still like it, even though it has all that.
No, absolutely. And I'm very excited to get to that point when we get to that point, which I'm going to guess is probably fairly soon. No, I'm just fucking around.
But like, there is this thing. There's also a thing, and debated on whether I ever wanted to bring it up because I didn't want to get all like Tumblr, like media analysis has to reflect my politics thing, because I've gone on record many times as hating that. Both of these characters, and I know this is probably the point to some extent because I know a bit about Linklater. They talk about this thing, and it's that sort of like, I'm so sick of growing up upper middle class. My family was just too perfect, and it just made me feel like it was like a prison. And they both kind of do that. And I know I know because I know a little bit about Linklater. I know there's some self-awareness to that, but I just can't listen to it and then feel like the characters are romantic because it makes me think of the band Trapped and how they talk about being trapped in the suburbs. It's so hard for us to grow up in the 90s and have our perfect families that they don't understand all the angst we have. They're too busy supporting us.
No,
They're
totally.
too
I totally
busy
get
being
that.
financially and emotionally supportive to us. And I'm like, all right.
Yeah. Oh God. But yeah, the rest of the movie, it's basically once again a series of conversations. They interact with a series of interesting characters in Vienna. They eventually essentially confess their feelings to each other. It's implied that they have sex, although it's never actually shown. And
They definitely have
eventually,
sex.
oh, they definitely do. It's not shown, but it's very heavily implied, and it's pretty
Well,
much certain that they do.
well, the reason I bring that up is because apparently that's like a conversation in the follow-up film.
Yes, and I was planning actually on watching the whole trilogy before
We
reviewing this,
were,
but we
have
for
to.
sure. I decided not to for this episode, obviously, because I wanted to keep my feelings pure for this. But yeah, so, and then eventually they say their goodbyes. They vow they're going to meet up in the next 6 months. Apparently in the sequel, they don't actually. And they both leave, they both leave Vienna, one for America and one back to Paris. Of course, they feel very strongly for each other. They feel there's a sense of like happiness and satisfaction, but also a sense of longing and loss to a certain extent as well. And
No,
that's
that
essentially
seems
the end of
very
the movie.
affecting. When they are saying goodbye to each other and they're talking, they're kind of like, there's this uncertainty and this fear and this pain of leaving. I remember watching that and thinking, oh, this is very emotional. I can put myself in this feeling if I met someone and I really liked them and it was in this kind of insane situation. That last scene is very moving. And I just thought like, oh, I'm assuming really, I mean, I know it's obviously people just like this movie and there's something they connect with it that I don't. But in that moment, I'm like, oh, this is what people are responding to is they're being put in this feeling. And they're thinking about how emotional, because that's a good scene when they're saying goodbye and it's kind of like they're making this plan to meet again in 6 months and they're both in their head. Like the unspoken thing is like, there's a very good chance that one or both of them just won't do it. Right. That for me is a scene and an emotion that works. So it is not like, I think for a romance film, the premise of this is very strong. And when it's scenes like that, where it's just about that fleeting feeling, I'm going like, oh, this would be really romantic. But boy, when either of our protagonists open their mouths, I'm just like, I don't care. I don't care what happens to either of you.
All right, so yes, that is the end of the synopsis here. Now, before we get to our Amazon reviews, Brian, I did also want to say why this movie was emotionally resonant to me, because I had two separate experiences in my life that were very much like this, or could have turned into this, I should say. So one was in London and one was in Seattle. The one in Seattle was definitely more of the girl I was talking to was very clearly wanting to hang out with me, but I was dealing with a really shitty toxic relationship, or I should say the person who I'd broken up with this person at this point, but they wanted to get back together.
There's some lingering
stuff, and this woman who was she was so fucking into me, like straight up. Like, and I decided not to pursue it because I'm like, well, this toxic girl that I told her I loved her and I was in this and I'm gonna go back. And the second I got back, she fucking yelled at me for 4 hours for no reason. I'm like, yep, I made a mistake, and I dropped her the next day after that.
You made the moral choice. You were like, well, technically, I'm seeing how things go with this person who, maybe it can work with. And you made the thing a real man would do. And you said, nope, I can't pursue this. And it fucked you over.
It fucked me
in the ass. You did the right
ass.
thing and you got fucked for it.
Yep, exactly. And then the next one, this one was, I want to say maybe a year and a half after this. I was in London and there was a very nice young man I was sleeping underneath, or I was above him in the fucking hostel I was staying at. And I could tell he was a little zesty. I'll be honest, I thought he was pretty cute. And we talked for probably a good hour. We were also both in our underwear. This had nothing to do with anything. I just didn't want to put my clothes on yet. But that's neither here nor there. We were not having gay sex yet, I promise. But it was a very, very cute French guy. He was probably a couple years younger than me. And he was like, yeah, we should hang out later. And I was like, yeah, totally. And I really thought about it. And I was coming back to the hostel. And by the time I got back, he was asleep. And then by the time I woke up, he was gone and he never came back.
Oh.
And I still think about that one to this day because I could tell we were definitely into each other. I'm going to be...
You were vibing. Well, and this, I'm sure that a lot of like, I think we've all had some experience kind of like that, and I can see why like a movie like this, a story like this resonates because again, that's to some degree that's a very universal experience, and it sounds like your experiences were even closer to the specifics of the film, and that it was while you were traveling and things. But Taylor, keep in mind the conversations that you and either of these individuals would have had would have been so much more interesting than the conversations that the protagonists of this film are having.
I'm gonna be honest, the one in Seattle were about the same.
All right.
The
All
ones that
right.
I was in London were a little bit more interesting, but they weren't that much more interesting.
Well, a person staying at a hostel in London, like that already denotes that, I feel like staying at a hostel is a pretty interesting go sign, just in terms of like, is someone going to have things to talk about, or are they going to say some quirked up nonsense? And they'll probably have some stuff to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's why this movie is very emotionally resonant to me, but I will save my ultimate final thoughts for after the Amazon reviews. Now, I don't have a crazy amount of Amazon reviews here. I really only have three. I only have three here. They're kind of long, not crazy long, but they're kind of long. But I think they run the gamut on how people generally feel about this movie. Of course, they were overwhelmingly positive, but I did include a couple negative reviews that had some substance as well. I mean, some of them didn't have substance, but I included one very negative review that had substance here. But of course, I always start off with the positive reviews. So
Yeah.
the first review here is from M. Jeffrey McMahon, who gives us 5 stars. And the head of the review says, "A romance to cure the most virulent cynic." And I also do want to say, even before we continue on this review, this is a romantic movie that's also very Gen X, but is not cynical. Like, there's not really any kind of cynicism.
It's not. It's not. You're right. And in
Which
fact,
a lot of Gen X romance movies are insanely cynical.
Yeah, it's something like Singles or something like that, which also I'm not a fan of. Well, and actually a core theme of this movie, right, is Ethan Hawke's character is he's kind of pretending to be cynical as a defense mechanism, and it's kind of about him like breaking that down, right? Or, kind of like coming to terms with that. That is like a motif of the film. This isn't a cynical film. I would agree with that. I think this is a film that is genuinely and unironically, earnestly like a romance film, which I would appreciate too, because again, like as Gen Xy as it is, you don't see that a lot.
No, you really don't. And then the body of the review says, "When I heard the storyline for Before Sunrise, a slacker American played by Ethan Hawke falls in love in Europe with Julie Delpy, I rolled my eyes. But this is a thoughtful and compelling movie that broke down my skeptical and cynical wall. First, the movie takes us through the awkward stages of two people going from being perfect strangers to removing their own walls and falling in love in a way that is never sappy." Which, once again, I want to be clear, this is a very romantic movie. It is romantic, but not sappy. Like, this is not like The Notebook or some stupid shit like that. Like, it's very sweet, but not sickly sweet, I would say.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I'll agree with that. Yeah, it's not sappy. I'm thinking about it now. It's not sappy. No, it's.
I think the later sequels, I think Before Sunset might be a little bit more so, but this one not so much.
So I assume that the sequels might get a little more. I'm sure they stay romantic. They might get a little more tumultuous. Well, tumultuous. I can't say that word for some
Oh yeah,
reason.
tumultuous. Yeah. I think Before Midnight does. I think
that
Before Midnight
would be my guess, just because it would be. From a plot standpoint, it would be the most interesting thing to do, right? To have there be ups and downs.
Yeah, and I believe it was either Ethan Hawke or Richard Linklater described the trilogy as the first one is what could be, the second one is what should be, and the last one is what it is.
Yeah,
that is essentially
that's interesting.
The story.
Hearing it described that way does, even though again I did not like this film, that does make me interested in seeing the rest of the trilogy when I hear it laid out like that.
And if it makes you feel any better, Brian, the sequel is Before Sunset is only 80 minutes long.
Well, it's very Linklater. He is obsessed with the passage of time. And in fact, the main character of this film describes having an idea for a public access TV show that is basically like a Linklater film.
Yeah. Oh, God. Using this falling in love motif, the writer Richard Linklater addresses several profound themes: the nature of time, the conflict between cynicism and romance, the obsession with death, the shortcomings of adulthood, etc. The dialogue between Hawke and Delpy is philosophical, but never too abstract, which it is philosophical, but it's very intro to philosophy. I will give Brian very much credit for that. This is very much intro 101 to philosophy stuff here.
Which I guess is realistic. Like, doesn't on its own bother me, but it is funny. And I don't think Linklater's intention or Ethan Hawke's intention or whoever came up with the dialogue, I don't think their intention is that we see these characters as these great philosophical minds. I do think that, like you said, we're supposed to see them as like young people who are like figuring stuff out and are at kind of a pivotal crossroads in their life.
No, totally. I suppose there's a parallel between the breaking down of my own cynicism and the characters. They have been hurt by life, have put up their walls, and through their discussions, they have gradually removed those walls so that by the movie's end, you think it's a crime if they don't fall in love and live happily ever after. Well, just watch the later movies. We'll see how that works. But the movie is more complex than a happy ending. The movie forces you to ask if their love would survive if removed from the brief ecstasy of their single day and parentheses night together. Once again, the sequels definitely delve into that.
The question mark hanging over the end of this movie does work for me. That is the scene where I'm like, oh, I do understand in this scene why people love this movie.
No, exactly. Is the brevity the cause of their ecstasy? Would a life of marriage disintegrate into the mundane? The characters struggle with these questions in what is my favorite romantic movie? So, and I agree with most of the review. I also decided to do all reviews that were made before Sunset came out. So these were all, I believe, pre-2004 reviews because I wanted to have the most concise reviews I possibly could because a lot of these reviews were made well after the trilogy was done.
And you didn't want reviews of the trilogy. You wanted reviews of this film on its own merit, right?
Exactly, 100%. And even though, of course, this is a movie that's extremely critically acclaimed, and of course, all the movies in the trilogy are, but at the same time, we didn't have the full story yet, so I wanted to know people's real feelings on part one of the fucking story.
Right.
And then our next review here is from Lynn M, who gives us 3 stars. And the head of the review says, "Really?" And the body of the review says, "Had difficulty suspending disbelief that a very intelligent young woman would get off her train with a total stranger who appeared to be less educated and less
motivated
than she." Of all
the things you could criticize this movie for.
Yeah, and who claimed to be just bumming around across Europe without any apparent means of income or destination. This is the one you'll agree with, Brian. Maybe because I didn't find Ethan Hawke's character compelling or interesting.
Okay, this in response to the thing about I can't believe this intelligent young woman would get off a train with this guy. Couple of responses. It's literally it's a romance film. There are lots of things I don't buy about this movie, but that one I can suspend my disbelief for because it literally, if it didn't happen, there'd be no movie. Second of all, how many intelligent, promising young women get murdered because they wander into a bad situation every year? I'm sorry.
And also, let's face it, a lot of beautiful, intelligent young women, they love falling for just no motivation, dirtbags. Dirtbags,
guys
100%.
with their mattress on the floor, yeah. Eating
Which, to be
peanut
fair,
butter from a spoon with a jar, yeah.
Yep.
Telling them come town bits.
Yes. Although to be clear though, Ethan Hawke is definitely, I would say, a guy very much in the transition from being a hot couch guy in this movie. He's somebody who wants to be better than the hot couch guy life he's currently living.
He wants to be better. Also, he's the type of guy that, because of his socioeconomic background, he was always going to transition out of being a hot couch guy eventually. He was slumming it in his hot couch days.
Which, by the way, so not hot couch guy, he is a hot train guy because he's been sleeping on a train for weeks. And also, he is wearing a hot couch because he's wearing a leather jacket throughout most of the movie.
Yeah, he brought the couch with him.
That's a realization I just had. I'm like, oh my God, he's wearing the hot couch.
If you're going to travel abroad, that's the way to do it.
By the way, Ethan Hawke's character in this movie is what fucking Kurt Wimmer thinks that's what Kurt Wimmer thinks he is in real life.
Yeah.
We will get the Kurt Wimmer haters on us eventually.
There's probably a lot of guys that watch this movie and see him and go, that's like me. And then they try to talk to women like this and they fumble.
Yeah. No, totally. Oh, God. And our last review here is from Evan Q, who gives us 1 star. And the head of the review says, movie equivalent of hanging to death. I'm like, damn, dude. A little dramatic, sure. But whatever.
Let's hear what he has to say. Give him a shot. Let him get
And the body of the review says, the depressing and boring first encounter of 2 blathering people with bad teeth and no interesting stories to tell.
I wrote this review.
Yeah. This is one of the worst movies I've ever watched. Ethan Hawke kind of has a little bit of snaggletooth going on. Not awful, but definitely.
Oh, he has normal teeth. That's what.
No, Brian, he has abnormal teeth that need to be corrected immediately.
He's deformed.
He's deformed. Yeah. He looks better than fucking my teeth did before I got braces. I can tell you that. Fucking.
My teeth are all fucking jacked up.
That's just the normal way fucking teeth are. It's called cosmetic surgery for a fucking reason. Although some of it's more necessary than cosmetic, but that's not here nor there.
Yeah.
This is one of the worst movies I've ever watched. 20 minutes.
See, I don't agree with that. I think that's a little dramatic because I don't like this movie, but I don't think it's a bad, you know what I mean? It's just not a movie. I just don't get it.
No, it just doesn't speak to you, and that's totally fine.
Right.
Even turning off the sound can't save you from the terrible pain that comes with this movie.
I love this review.
They clearly can't get enough of themselves. If it was possible to walk aimlessly, piss and bore people to death, they would do it. Mind you, they came
Oh my
very
God.
close.
Oh my God.
If you're hoping to become depressed or looking for an alternative to a sleeping pill, by all means watch this movie. Otherwise, stay far away from this total abomination of a movie.
I was starting to feel lonely when you were telling me about the critic score, and I was like, I'm glad there's someone. This is rougher than my estimation of this film, but it is essentially how I feel about these characters.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus. And I do want to say another reason why this movie is very emotionally resonant to a lot of people is that both Richard Linklater and Kim Krizan actually based this movie off of mutual experiences they had while traveling and talking to people. So I'm just going to read just verbatim what I found on IMDb, but the idea for the movie came from the backgrounds of both Linklater and Krizan. Linklater spent a night walking around Philadelphia with Amy, a woman he randomly met. Krizan rode around Europe on trains meeting people, and on one trip, she met a Norwegian man on their way to Paris, and ended up walking around the city all night, just like this movie, basically. And Krizan has never said whether or not they had sex or even dated or whatever, but the really tragic one here is that Linklater and Amy actually stayed in contact, and they eventually lost contact because it was the fucking 90s, social media didn't fucking exist.
Yeah.
It was hard to keep contact with somebody across the ocean. But after he had made this movie, or when he was making this movie, he tried reaching out to her, and he found out she died in a car accident before this movie came out.
Oh, awful.
So, real rough.
I thought maybe you were gonna say like, oh, they lost contact, but then she saw this movie and she was really touched or something because she could tell it was about her. You know, I was like, oh, that's nice, but nope.
Nope. And Krizan apparently never regained contact with the Norwegian man after their brief affair. So that's why I think this movie's resonant with a lot of people is, especially as somebody who, has traveled a lot, and I'm planning on doing even more traveling with the more money that I have, is that you meet these people that have it's just like meeting anybody in real life, but people from different backgrounds, people from different cultures, people with different life experiences, and you can somehow create like
a world all your own with them.
Yeah, exactly. And, sort of create this mutual shared understanding of each other in a way that I think just meeting people in whatever fucking city you live in isn't usually quite the same. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's definitely different.
It's different because it's like you're making this connection over boundaries of time and space and culture, which makes it more profound.
Exactly. 100%.
I think I follow that. That's romantic. That's extremely romantic.
Exactly. So, but yes, those are our Amazon reviews. Now, of course, last week, Brian, I chose to do the final thoughts for fucking Wild at Heart because I know we disagreed on that one. I did like that movie, to be very clear, but we definitely had different perceptions of it. But I'm so excited for your final thoughts here, Brian. I know we've already talked about it quite a bit.
So, in general, I have issues with Linklater. I think he is a skilled filmmaker. I think as a writer, he has things he's very good at and very bad at, and that basically haunts all of his work that I have seen. All of it. For me, the things that I dislike about his writing style, his tendencies, especially with dialogue, are overwhelming in this film. But when I think about how strong, because again, Taylor, this is not a film that I would have thought that you would have liked based on what I know about your taste. Because you, at points in your friendship, have been on record, and you've alluded to that in here, as being someone who is put off by a lot of portrayal, romantic films, which I would agree with you with, for the most part. But for me, a lot of those same things where I'm like, I don't really, it's not my idea of romance, are on display here. Also, it's very, and I'm being sincere, it is interesting and kind of heartwarming that I'm surprised in that way to see you have that response to this film. And when I think about how so many people respond to this way and how there's this basic, human need for there's this lack of universality and there's this need for connection that we all have. And that's what this movie I think is speaking for a lot of people. But again, I find these characters so unlikable that it's baffling to me. That even thinking I think that's such a strong premise, such a great, simple romance story, and then it's oh yeah, but you gave me the most annoying couple in the world, and I just do not want to be put in a situation where I have to identify with them. And I gotta tell you, right now, it's feeling like a pretty lonely position to be in. It's just me and that one asshole that wrote that Amazon review.
Yeah, but that's the thing though, right? Is that do you think that it would have been better if Ethan Hawke was a rockabilly guy and loved Elvis? Do you think it would have worked better? And Julie Delpy was a fucking a 90s woman with big tits and a boy's ass? You think it would have worked? I'm just being a dick at this point.
Not if Linklater was writing it.
Yeah. No, totally fair, totally fair. Oh God. But yeah, so my final thoughts, I've definitely said of course, the vast majority of my final thoughts here. But no, I love this movie a lot. I've grown up a lot in regards to what I prefer to see in romance and in love and movies and in real life. I do hate
Sure.
the vast majority of romance movies because I don't think they're realistic in a lot of ways. So a lot of them are extremely sappy, which of course romance can be sappy, right? But
Yeah, that's part of it. Sure.
a lot of sappy romance comes across as very codependent and unhealthy. I don't like a lot of romance in movies because it only really shows the extremes. It doesn't really show the sort of normal moments and for lack of a better word, the mundanity of romance and love and connection. And a lot of it is just like, it's like a car crash happening in a lot of romance. It's like these just intense series of events that happen and they just go along with the flow. And of course, romance can happen like that too. But that's not romance that I personally identify with and is not a romance that I would ever want to have in real life. Whereas something like this that feels more organic, it feels very much, like I said, just showing them sort of, once again, for lack of a better word, the mundanity and the just ordinariness and also just the organic burgeoning connection that this romance has for me speaks to me in a way that the vast majority of romance movies don't work for me. So that's why I think I love this more than anything else, because I could conceivably have a romance like this. Whereas, movies like True Romance and movies like Wild at Heart, which are movies that are, of course, great movies, but I would hate to be in romances like that in real life. And not even just regardless of the violence that happens, just how intense that is, I would hate being in a romance like that because I've been in those situations and they're miserable.
Right. Well, likewise. But even when I think about the mundanity, I think, what about for me, a more realistic romantic film that I love, and one of the only romance films that I really, really love is The Wedding Singer, for instance, which speaks to a different sort of, I think, angst and a different sort of malaise. When you describe what it is about this film that you respond to in that way, it does make more sense to me. Like I said, there are things, when I look at the scene of them saying their goodbyes at the train stop in isolation, and I connect to those emotions, I go, okay, this is the thing. These are the feelings that people are grappling with when they connect with this film. I think ultimately there's just too many Linklaterisms in the dialogue, which again is the blessing and curse for me of him as a writer and a filmmaker. Although apparently, allegedly, he didn't write much of the dialogue in this film. But every time I watch a Linklater film, there's something about the way he writes dialogue where I'm like, some of this is good, and some of it is just really off-putting to me.
Yes, and I think if we ever get to reviewing Boyhood, which I believe is overall his most critically acclaimed film, this is definitely more so in regards to just how universally acclaimed this is. But Boyhood, I think, is the one that people really latched onto, and that is a movie that was very emotionally resonant to me, and I would argue it probably will be to you because it is about a boy who grew up in the exact same time we grew up in.
I remember actually being very interested in Boyhood, and this is already having complicated feelings about Linklater. I have very complicated feelings about Suburbia and Fast Times. They're both movies that I almost have sort of a love-hate relationship with.
You mean Dazed and Confused, because Fast Times was...
Dazed and Confused. I said Fast Times, didn't I? Yeah, it's much earlier.
Cameron Crowe, that's it.
And it's much older. It's much older than Dazed and Confused. Yeah, I have kind of a love-hate relationship with Dazed and Confused and with Suburbia, but I've been very interested in Boyhood. Not just because of, the time it takes place, but it seems almost like the ultimate Linklater film.
It is the apotheosis of his entire filmography because it does show a boy growing up from being a early grade school child to literally becoming an adult. And
which is what his whole career has been building towards.
Yes, 100%. And I'm sure, as you know, obviously, it was filmed in real time. All these actors were filmed essentially growing up and
every 4 years, right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, roughly every 3 or 4 years, yeah. And I know famously Red Letter Media hated that movie, but I think what, once again, is so resonant to me about that film is that it shows such a concise passing of time, and it shows, once again, the mundanity, and it shows these people who aren't always very pleasant people. In fact, a lot of them are annoying, stupid people. But, it's about a boy and a girl growing up. Of course they're going to be fucking annoying. Of course they're going to be stupid.
They're going to be awful at times because they're fucking kids. Because growing up sucks and it feels awful and traumatic and horrible.
Yeah, and that movie exemplifies that in a way that is both, cosmically comforting, but also cosmically horrifying.
Yeah, I think eventually we do have to do Boyhood.
So yeah, no, I love Boyhood. I love this movie. I like Dazed and Confused. I'm not a big fan of it, but I do like it. I would say it's probably my least favorite Linklater movie that I've seen. And also, I did mention Bernie earlier, just very momentarily, but Bernie's also a great fucking movie. Have you seen Bernie?
I have. I like Bernie. I almost think of Bernie as, it is very Linklater in its dialogue and in its direction. Because its themes are a little bit different, I almost think of it as like a little bit outside of the Linklater canon, if that makes sense. Not that it's not. It totally feels like Linklater. But it's sort of like, it's like he's switching gears a little bit on that film, you know? He's stretching some different muscles.
No, absolutely. All right, but yes, it is getting late as shit. We're old fucking millennials. You know, I will cry myself to sleep not being able to have my both male French and I think she was Canadian girl lover situation I've never had. So we're gonna
maybe
end
you'll
this
be in a
situation
where you meet them
here.
both. You meet them both at some transit station in Vienna, and then the three of you spend a day together.
And then we make a cornhub style video. No, I'm not fucking around. But anyways, so yes, that is Before Sunrise. So let's get into our pluggables here. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on twitter.com. And as well, please subscribe and follow us on both our YouTube and our Spotify channel, where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well as always, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father campaign. Of course, our good friends Scott, Sean, and Robert are creating a fantastic series. They need more moral and financial support, so please donate to them today to get their fantastic series off the ground. They have one episode on YouTube. Of course, we're always linking it in the episode description now, but please give it a watch, give it a like. And if you donate to the campaign, just send us an email, send us a YouTube comment, just show us any proof that you donated, and we will, within reason, about 20, 25 bucks, match your donation because we want Scott, Sean, and Robert's dream of creating this series to become a reality.
Yeah, maybe we'll do like a live stream with them. They can give us a little chat into the process of it or something when they make more episodes, because it's a pretty interesting premise for a series. You guys really should watch that pilot. It's pretty ambitious.
No, fucking absolutely. And then, well, speaking of ambitious, so of course we've been mentioning it since December since it happened, but we are also going to put the link to the now official Luigi Mangione Defense Fund Give, Send, Go campaign, which last time I checked like a day or two ago, it's now over $500,000. So people have donated a lot of money to this campaign.
Yes.
It is now official. Luigi and his defense team are now accepting the donations. So please donate to the campaign. Of course, we love our good boy Luigi. We want him to have a free and fair trial. At the very bare minimum, at the moment, he is absolutely innocent, not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. 100%.
Yeah, finding him guilty at this structure would be ridiculous. There is no real evidence that we've been presented with linking him, and they're fucking him and his representation hard. Please donate. And again, please talking about it. Please keep sharing articles. Keep this in the public eye, because there is some fuckery going on. His attorney has indicated that she has not been allowed to be included in the discovery process. There is essential evidence that the arresting officers and the prosecution allegedly have that they are not sharing with her so that she can prepare for it. It's going to be a rough road for Luigi, and we want to support him financially, but we also just want to keep people talking about him. We want him to know, because he has us on his side. He has so many of us on his side, and that's what makes this all so important.
Yes, we are giving him our energy like Goku and everybody giving Goku.
We're building a spirit bomb.
Yeah. So yes, please donate to the Luigi campaign. And we have both now donated to the Luigi campaign, to be very
Yes.
So we believe in it very much so.
Yes, it is official now. There's no reason not to. Help your boy out.
Absolutely. And then, Brian, do you have any pluggables as always?
Just as always, follow us at Millennials, our old pod on Instagram and Threads. It's the easiest way to harass me if you're mad about the show, if you're mad about my Linklater takes, if you're mad about, I don't know, what else?
Or Kurt Wimmer takes.
People mad. Yeah, Kurt Wimmer. Yeah, we hate him. He's our enemy. We're gonna parody him. If you want to talk about The Swimmer, we love a good swimmer riff. Send us your cringe so that we can talk about some cringe generational stuff. Please do not send episodes of the show and tell me that they're cringe. Getting ahead of that bit preemptively. But yeah, follow us at Millennials, our old pod on Threads and Instagram, and follow Millennials, our old podcast on Facebook. You can follow me at JLo Biafra on Instagram and Threads as well. I post a lot about what records I'm buying, what books I'm reading. Another easy way to harass me if I say anything on the show that makes you really mad.
Yes, absolutely. And talk about cringe individuals. If you have recently been betrayed by a special needs individual, tell us about it.
Oh,
please tell us.
That'll be in our back pocket for the next episode.
Oh God.
You
So
guys
yeah,
like
we
TikTok
will keep
music?
that
I love
vague.
it.
We will keep that vague. We really will. But you know what? Speaking of before sunrise, Brian, I think it's time we go to bed before sunrise
Yeah,
because I want to get
before
more than like
sunrise.
2 hours of sleep.
Yeah. Good night,
So
everyone.
have a good night, everybody. Sleep tight and don't let your unrequited loves haunt you in your sleep. Have a good night.